Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're heading for the book of Joshua, but instead of doing a lot of the book or even getting into the introduction to the book, let me rather take you backwards into a couple of passages that will help you to understand how God modeled for Joshua what he needed to be. And to start with, I want you to go back to Exodus 17, verses 9 through 16. What these are the places Joshua showed up in the narrative long before Joshua was the guy. This is the discipleship of Joshua. He appears 7 times with Moses in the Bible before he takes the leadership of Israel. And every experience was a stage in his own training. The first 3 included external leadership lessons. So I want to begin with those external leadership lessons, starting with somebody reading Exodus 17, verses 9 through 16, if you will. I want to set the text if I can. God had provided for them bitter water at Marah in Exodus 15. Marah, like myrrh, bitterness. And then, after they threw the stick into the water and it was healed, they went on to a place called Elim in 1527. So the Exodus 15:27 tells about how there were 10 palm trees and pools of water, and everybody was filled up their canteens, and it was all really good. And then they realized they didn't have food. So they called on God, and in Exodus 16, if 15 was filling the canteens, 16 was filling the stomachs. In Exodus 16, he brought the quail, remember? And the story of the quail coming on the ground? Well, here's the thing. Now that God has given them food, God has given them water, and he's taught them a few things about how he's going to take care of them. And then we get to the place where the very first time they get to Rephidim. And the important thing for you to understand is Raphad is like resting. When they came to Rephidim, they came to a place in the desert that was like a soft, sandy place. So it was a place where they could relax. Why is that important? Because it's in the background of that relaxation and that resting place, Raphad or Rephidim, that all of a sudden the doctor ordered a little bit of a break, and they settled down. And out of the story of the Amalekite attack came the first time that the chief in the making, Joshua, emerges. You don't see Joshua before this time. So somewhere in your Bible at Exodus 17, make a note, this is the first appearance of Joshua. And in 17, if you look at it in verse 17:8, Amalek came and fought against the Israel at Rephidim. First thing you have to know is Moses focused immediately on 6 things that a leader has to know to make good decisions, and he does it in front of Joshua. And these are going to be important. It's not just applying Exodus 17 to your life. I want you to understand how this applies to a discipleship model. So, in 17:8, first thing I would say is leaders have to know the circumstances, the situation that they're faced with. Nobody conquers a demon they don't know about, and every move of a leader is preceded by an accurate assessment of the circumstances that they're facing. So in verse 8, it says that Amalek came and fought against Israel and Rephidim. Moses said to Joshua, "Choose out men for us." Moses had an understanding of who he was up against, but Joshua had never seen them before. How did Moses know who the Amalekites were? 40 years of his life he spent out there, and he knew who the Amalekites were. And he knew who the Midianites were. He was in a Midianite camp, and the Amalekites were the next ones to the east. So he recognized them when they come over the hill. My first point is Moses knew something Joshua didn't. He knew the enemy better than Joshua did. So when he calls Joshua, the first thing that a leader has to pass on to the follower is, I need to teach you that is an Amalekite. You have to be able to see what the battle is. Second, I would say that leaders have to know the enemy they face in a very, not just the circumstances, but the specifics about the enemy. And in verse 9, it says, Moses said, "Choose out and go for us to fight out against Amalek." Now, the interesting thing is, sometimes reconnaissance is what's necessary to gain knowledge. So in Numbers 13, they sent the spies up in Numbers 13 and 14 to gain it. Whether it's physical or spiritual, battles are won or lost on enemy assessment. That's something you need to know. If you incorrectly assess your enemy, you're going to lose. You need to know how strong and what they are like in order to take them on. And in verse 9, you have to understand how they're going to attack, what they're going to attack with, so that you can prepare your essential defenses. So I would say you need to know the circumstances in verse 8, and you need to know the enemy in verse 9. And I would say in verse 9, wise leaders assess their own team to meet the battle demand. You have to understand. You have to know more than just the circumstances and the leader. You have to know what your resources are. So he turns to Joshua and says, Josh, I want you to take out our men. The way Moses knew who was to be chosen, I do not know. There's nothing in the text that tells you how he knew Joshua other than the Numbers 13-14 story. But obviously, there was a knowledge that Moses had of this younger man, 40 years younger than him, and he said, I want you to get on board. I think if you keep reading, you come to the conclusion that leaders have to understand that even physical problems of God's people are fought in heavenly places. How do I get that? Look at verses 10 through 13 and tell me what about Moses, what is Moses doing that suggests he understands the physical battle is in fact an echo of a spiritual one. He's praying, and what he's doing is he's holding up his hands, which in Hebrew is the expression for prayer. In other words, what he's doing is turning up his hands in prayer, asking God to defeat the Amalekites. There's a very strange thing. The upward palms are always a position of prayer, of supplication. Supplication is you're asking for something, okay? And in extreme times of need, the hands are actually lifted upward, even like this, and the palms extended like this. That's like an extreme need. So what you have is he's standing there and he's expressing himself. By the way, if you're looking for verses for that, 1 Timothy 2:8, that holy hands lifted up. It's the idea of men praying with their holy hands lifted up. It's in the text. It's an ancient type of prayer. The important thing for us is this. 2 Corinthians 10 says that you don't wrestle against flesh and blood. The Amalekites look like flesh and blood. However, the battle is being fought by Moses on the hill in prayer as much as by Joshua and the battle down below. So when Moses' hands give out, what happens? The battle turns away from them. And when Moses' hands are boosted up, what happens? There's victory. He's not saying, it's not this. It's prayer. When Moses is distracted and he pulls back his interceding prayers, then things are happening badly for his people. One of the things that has to happen is Joshua's sent down there to fight, but Moses is up top and he's fighting too. He's fighting in spiritual places. And what I think is important is that a leader has to understand that the physical fight is an echo of the spiritual fight. This is God's people. Why is this? Am I spiritualizing? I'm not. I'll tell you why I'm not. Because God told them to go to the promised land. They're on a mission from God. Anything that blocks a mission from God is spiritually motivated. Any attack on God's work is spiritually motivated. And so Moses is standing there with his palms extended, and he is in Exodus 17, verses 10 through 13. He's fighting in prayer what Joshua's fighting in action. That means that as you become a mentor for others, their struggles are your struggle, but you're helping them struggle on your knees while they're doing the struggle. Does that make sense? I think there's another thing. Leaders have to be good followers. And so what you see is in verses 9 and 10 in particular, 17, 9, and 10, it says specifically that Joshua was told to go out and do it, and Joshua did as Moses told him. It looks to me like there's unquestioning obedience in Joshua. Do not expect God to give you leadership if you cannot be a good follower. God will not give you leadership without following. And there's going to have to be respect for the people ahead of you and good following in order to become a good leader. There's something else. Moses was literally carving out Joshua's place of leadership by handing him the command of the armies. This is the first time that they're fighting as an army, and he's commanding the army from the very beginning. Who is this guy Joshua? I don't know, but that's who Moses told us to follow. And so in a very real way, people are going to watch you as you move toward leadership. And they're going to mark your life by who you have followed. I'm expecting, and let me just say it honestly, I'm expecting people to expect you to know more about the text because of the year you spend here. I'm expecting that. Leaders have to acknowledge where true victory comes from. Where does it come from? Look at verse 14. Where do you get the idea that Joshua is learning? The Lord said to Moses, write this in a book and recite it to Josh. Why? Because he was busy fighting. He wasn't watching Moses' arms. You got to teach him because he doesn't know if you don't tell him. Yes, you were up there praying, but he didn't see you. So the part that he doesn't see, you have to tell him. Okay? Does everybody see what we're doing? First time Joshua shows up here, there is this incredible experience. And what is he learning? I call this lesson the value of the worn knee. The point is that he's learning from the beginning, his first time out, what it means to make a spiritual victory. And it happens on your knees, but it also happens out there in the field of battle. Okay, that's the first of 7 times you're going to see Joshua. Fast forward now. Go up to chapter 24. Okay, we stop on Exodus 24. And when we get there, we find out that after the last battle, several things happened. In 18, Jethro had a little talking to with Moses. And in 19, they got to the mountain of the law. And in 20, 21, 22, 23, they've been up on the mountain. That is Moses and Joshua. And God has been speaking, and God's been, finger writing in stone, cool stuff happening, civil code of law. When you get to chapter 24, verse 1, and what you find is in 24:1, God invites the 70 elders and a special guest list of leaders to the mountain to worship him, okay? And they're not allowed to move up the mountain with Moses, but they're allowed to come with a corporate time of reverence. So they do that. And they bow down and they prostrate themselves in chapter 24, verse 1. Now, some distance away is Moses. And Moses prepared himself for the meeting. He rose up early in the morning. He wrote down the words that God had given him in the previous encounter. He raised up an altar, put standing stones for the tribes. He sprinkled the blood of the offerings on the altar. He read over the words he had written before the people, and they affirmed their commitment. This is all 24, 4-8. Get down to verse 10. Somebody read verses 10 and 11 out loud.
And they saw the God of Israel, and under his feet there appeared to be a pavement of sapphire, as clear as the sky itself. Yet he did not stretch out his hand against the nobles of the sons of Israel, and they saw God, and they ate and drank.
Now, we saw this before, and I indicated to you that this is one of the weirdest things I've ever seen in Scripture. God zips by, and they see him, and they sit down and they have a banquet. But the reason we came back here is, even though this is an unprecedented event in human history, I want you to notice that when Moses was there in verse 13, it says that, so Moses arose with Joshua, his servant. There he is. The second time you see Joshua, what is he observing? What's going on in the room that he's observing? He's on a mountainside, and God shows up. Now that's cool by itself, and we could stop right there. But God doesn't show up to Moses and Joshua. God shows up to more than Moses and Joshua. Why is that important? Think. It is essential that Joshua learn this next lesson. The lesson is that leaders need to lock arms with other leaders. And remember that 24 happens after 18, after he gets spanked by Jethro. In other words, Moses had to learn it from Jethro. Joshua had to learn it from Moses. Okay? We have no record in the Bible of Joshua hoarding power, or of ever taking on responsibility that God hadn't given him. Where do you suppose he learned that? So Moses hoarded power, and Jethro had to smack him down. God showed up in front of Moses, and Joshua learned the lesson and never made that mistake. So if you expose the disciple to the right elements, you help them. You're going to learn by example or learn by experience. And if you don't want them to learn by experience because that's painful, help them by example. Okay? I call this the value of locked arms. And that's the idea of learning the mystery of having other people on your team, the value of building a team. So far, he's learned to drop to his knees and pray when he wants to fight something in the physical realm. It has to be fought in the spiritual. And the second thing he learned is that you have to build a team and lock arms with other leaders. Let's go to a third one. Let's fast forward on again to chapter 32. Exodus 32. And this time, he's going to learn the value of a trained ear. I bring you now to Moses and Joshua up on top of the mountain. And the problem with being on top of the mountain is the people are down below. And it says that he delayed coming down. And this is when the people tell Aaron, take all of our earrings and turn them into a calf. We looked at this just the other day. However, they make the Hathor goddess, they form the calf, and then you get down to, before Moses and Joshua came down and discovered the sin in the camp, God already revealed in verse 7 to Moses what was going on. The Lord spoke to Moses and said, go down at once, for your people whom you brought up from the land of Egypt have corrupted themselves. Okay, Moses hears that. Apparently, Joshua did not. How do I know that? In 17 and 18, it's pretty clear that's not clear to him. So verse 17 says, when Joshua heard the sound of the people as they shouted, he said to Moses, there's the sound of war in the camp. Here's what I want you to hear. Third thing he needed to hear. He needed to understand prayer and team, and now he needs to be able to hear with a sensitive ear. He has to learn to hear the hearts of men. The critical error of Joshua was to satisfice. He needed to look past his natural strengths and into strengths that he didn't yet develop. Let me say it this way. The guy is a fighter. He's a commander of an army. He hears a shout. What's his first thought? It's war, because that's what he's strong in. Guys, all of you are going to fall back to your own natural strengths when you're not listening to what God says. You will fall back to your own natural strengths. You will power your way through in the flesh when you don't have spiritual power to draw from because you're not walking with God. All of you will experience that. What he was experiencing was he did not know how to move past his natural strength. So he had to learn that there was something bigger that he had to see. Now, granted, Moses had an insight from God. At the same time, even though Moses had an insight from God and Joshua didn't, he still needed to learn to develop sensitive ears. So we've got worn knees, locked arms, trained ears, okay? Those are all external leadership lessons. I want to go to Numbers 4, 5, and 6, and these are not external, they're internal leadership lessons, but they also occur before the time Joshua takes over. And the first one is found in Exodus 33. So let's go to number 4, will be found in Exodus 33. Exodus 33 is after they resume the journey, and there are some internal, let's say, appetites that have to happen. And these 3 include internal thirst for God, which is worship encounters, finding the true compass of direction, which is overcoming the need for affirmation and recognition. And the third one's going to be vision. Okay, I'm going to break these down slowly for you, but I need you to see what they are. The very first one, deep within the heart of every person who would lead, there is the need to have deep communion with God before you try to lead men. And the problem in chapter 33 is going to illustrate this for us. Now, I do not know if, I can't resist an analogy, and I do not know if you know the book. How many of you know the book Watership Down? Okay, one of you, okay. In 1969, Richard Adams wrote Watership Down. The story was set in a region he grew up in part of England. On a summer day in 1967, the author was driving along the road from Stratford upon Avon with his family, and he told his daughters, his 10 and 8-year-old daughters, a story that he wrote down, and it became a children's book, which is now a treasure. If you have never read it, you want to read this book. Seriously. For the uninitiated, Watership Down is about a group of rabbits, and they're on a journey from a meadow to a new warren. That's where they're going. And it's told from the perspective of the rabbits. Now, you have to work a little bit because the rabbits talk, okay? But they have their own institutions of religion and government and education and economics and family. And I have a fading memory of the book, but let me say this. Moving along to their new warren, they came upon this farm, and they see this farm, and there's all these bunnies, and they gather around, and they cannot figure out what they're looking at. They discover this amazing sight. There's this fence around this small group of rabbits that are resting on the inside of the fence. Now, these weary travelers have been coming a long way. They've been hopping for a long time, and they see these well-fed rabbits like lying around in hammocks and, sitting there with parasols and talking to each other, having cups of tea, and really enjoying themselves. And one of them burrows underneath the fence and goes into the other rabbits and says, "Hey, look over there. That's all my bunny buddies." And they're all out there, like this. And he says, "What are you guys doing?" "Oh, man, we have the life. Let me tell you about the life we have. We have the life. We just kind of lay here and roll around and hop every now and then when we feel like it. And every single day, these pellets appear in this bowl, and they are delicious, and they are unbelievable, delicious and nutritious, taste like chicken. Anyway, you love them, and they pour them, and you don't know how they get there, and every day you look at these pellets, and you eat your pellets, and you are happy." Well, our little Moses bunny leader says, "All right, everybody, under the fence." So they all come piling in, and now all of a sudden, this thing is loaded with bunnies. Everywhere they look, there's just bunnies. And the bunnies are eating the pellets. Well, the next day, they get up, and there are bowls all over the outside on the edge of the fence, and there are pellets in them. And everybody has pellets, and they go over and they hop over and they eat the pellets, and they're having a great time, and they're just laying around, doing what rabbits do. I don't know. And one of our bunnies was inquisitive. He didn't like being fenced in because he was kind of one who liked to wander a little bit. So he went crawling out from underneath the fence and went around to the backside of the barn. And what he saw was unbelievable. He saw pelts of rabbits hanging on the back of the barn. And so he went hopping around the barn as fast as he could, came back underneath the fence, and he said, "We got to get out of here. We got to get out of here. They're killing bunnies over there." And one of the bunnies, it's just really fat, that had been there a long time, said, "Hey, buddy, look. It's true. Every now and then we lose one of our bunnies. But, honestly, it's a good life. We eat our pellets, and we're full, and we have these wonderful, delicious pellets, and we're not going to leave." And then the rest of the story is he's struggling to get these bunnies out before they get too fat, before they can't go underneath the fence anymore, so that he can get them to freedom. And he's talking to them, and they're so lured into the ease of getting these wonderful, delicious pellets. Now, the analogy is very simple. The idea is, with no way of truly comforting themselves of the distance from God, a lot of people are so fearing their own end that they're just slogging down the next drink and trying not to think of it. Yeah, I know, people die, but I got this booze. I know people die, but I got the sports. I got these cars. I got this entertainment. And they're moved over, and you have to watch how quickly. Every time I do a funeral over at Nelson Funeral Home, I am amazed at how fast people make it to Ruby Tuesdays across the street to the bar. It's amazing. If I have unsaved people, it is minutes before they're bellying up to the bar. It's like, yeah, I know, people die, that's really bad, can I have another? Because that's the only way they can manage to get through. I think you've all been in school long enough to know that putting off studying and hoping the exam won't come is really not a good way to get through the course. It's not going to happen. And that's exactly what these guys do. Now, Exodus 32 closed with the repentance over the offering of the children of Israel. 3,000 people perished, 32, 34. And Moses appeals the decision in chapter 33 God threatens to delegate to march off and not to go with him, and Moses is appealing that. Remember this? And he says, if you won't go with me, I can't do this. And all of that is the background of this. And after the sin in the camp and the death of the thousands, I want you to get down to 33:11 for a minute. Thus the Lord used to speak to Moses face to face, just as a man speaks to his friend. When Moses returned to the camp, his servant Joshua son of Nun, a young man, would not depart from the tent. Here's the thing. 32 and 33 are one of the most intimate encounters between God and Moses in the entire Bible. And there's only one person who sees it, Joshua. He's the only one who watches Moses and God wrestle. He's the only one who understands what a deep process intimacy with God was with Moses. Why is he there? Does God need somebody to guard the tent? He's God. If he's swallowing people up in the earth, what's the likelihood he has to put a lock on his door? Okay? It's not in front of an all-seeing God. You don't need a security system. So what's Joshua doing there? God parked Josh right in the view of him and Moses wrestling before God. By the way, why did God threaten to leave? God was never going to not go with them. So why is he messing with Moses? Hey, I ain't going. You're not going, I can't go. Please don't make me go. I don't want to go. These are your people, God. Look at what happened to Moses. Moses, in the beginning of the journey out of Egypt, every time he spoke to God, said, this is your people, and I didn't ask for this. Then when he gets to God in 32, 33, and God says, I'm going to pull back, Moses actually puts forward the idea, you don't want these people to perish in the desert. If they perish in the desert, all the other nations aren't going to know the kind of God you are. And all of a sudden what's happening is Moses is taking responsibility for being the leader. And Joshua is watching it happen. Why? So that he doesn't have to go through this, because he's going to be in Canaan. There's no time for Joshua to walk across, stand eyeball to eyeball with the people of Jericho and kind of go through his teenage years and try to find himself. You better be on your game, because you're standing in front of the Canaanites and they're coming to get you, and if you're not ready to fight, you're going to lose. There's no time for Joshua to learn this lesson later. So God teaches it to him by Moses. Now, one of the things I've learned as a discipler, as a mentor to people, is I've learned that my struggles shouldn't be hidden from you. That when I'm struggling, I should struggle in a way that is not burdensome to you, because it's not yet your struggle, but that it's not also hidden from you, okay? And I think that that's helpful, because that allows you to know the struggle is real. It's going to happen, okay? There are things about the Christian life that are going to be heavy, and they're going to be hard for you to deal with. You know what I think is probably the hardest one? What would you say as a leader would be the single hardest, emotionally hardest thing? When you traffic in truth constantly, it's easy to traffic unlived truth. Not that it wasn't ever lived, but at the moment. I have to preach on Sunday whether I'm mad at my wife or not. I got to preach on Sunday whether or not I'm mad at God about something or not. I got to get up when my best friend dies and do the funeral. And how I feel can't be the relevant issue. But at some point that comes back to bite your heart. I think probably one of the hardest things to overcome is to constantly develop a new hunger and a new thirst in your life for intimacy with God. Ministry and life comes at you fast. And there are so many things going on. I find myself struggling over things that were 3 problems ago. I'm still back there, and I'm getting hit with other problems, and I haven't fixed that one yet. And so I don't know. I personally think one of the heavier things that goes on is that I really appreciate this passage, because I really appreciate that in 33, you know, there's this cloud and this pillar of fire, and God is leading in incredible ways. But then there's the intimate side of Moses just arguing with God and going, I can't do this. And God saying, listen, you're going. Yeah, but these are your people. Why are you doing this? And Joshua's watching and absorbing all that. I really think that's helpful. Okay, I got to keep going. Let me get you to a very, very, very significant thing. I think the next passage, I have to jump over to Numbers now, and going to Numbers chapter 11, let me fast forward to the 5th place where he shows up, Numbers chapter 11. This is the 5th place. You will find Joshua in the narrative before he's the leader. And I'm thinking toward the end of the passage, and think like 11:26, okay? Somebody read 26 to 29, nice and loud.
But 2 men had remained in the camp. The name of one was Eldad, and the name of the other was Medad. And the Spirit rested upon them. Now they were among those who had been registered, but had not gone out to the tent. And they prophesied in the camp. So a young man ran and told Moses and said, Eldad and Medad are prophesying in the camp. Then Joshua the son of Nun, the attendant of Moses from his youth, said, Moses, my Lord, restrain them. But Moses said to him, Are you jealous for my sake? Would that all the Lord's people were prophets, that the Lord would put his Spirit upon them? Then Moses returned to the camp, both he and the elders of Israel.
I think it's important that you identify something about Moses. Moses really wasn't walking around worried about his position. He knew pretty much where God had him. Now, what happens in this story is that the Spirit of God settles and these guys begin prophesying. That is, they begin speaking for God, but they're not Moses and they're not part of the official Moses stamp of approval broadcasting situation. So all of a sudden, there are some unregistered broadcasters of prophecy. And what is Joshua's first response? We got to stop him. Numbers 12:3 says this, Moses was a humble man, the most humble man of his day. By the way, I don't think he wrote Numbers 12:3. I think there's really no way Moses could have written Numbers 12:3, because it's really hard to pen out, I am the most humble man ever. I mean, I think that just pretty much negates itself, right? But here's the thing. Humility is not feeling bad about yourself. Humility is thinking of the other person first. It's other person-centeredness. And Joshua is worried about how this prophesying reflects on Moses. Moses is not. What does Moses answer? Seriously? You're going to go out there and tell him to stop? Here's what I would rather happen. What does he say? Everybody's speaking the word of God. You know what? I am not. What is the lesson? What is the lesson? Because you know this one. What did Joshua need to learn in that exchange? Moses is absolutely okay with this. So don't get the idea that what they're prophesying is bad. They're not prophesying badly. They're just not on the team. I think that he thought that Moses was the guy. And how can you do this without the seal of approval of Moses? He's the guy. And Moses is going, wait a minute. These people aren't mine. They're God's. If God wants to speak through them, you think he's got to go through me? Are you kidding me? I think Joshua had to know that God isn't limited to the box of his organization and his administration. I think it's easy to so crave to be the person in the spotlight because you are in the spotlight that anyone else gets the spotlight and it can actually hit your ego. And I really think there's a great lesson here. I don't want to press the point too much, but I'm moved by the fact that Moses, in the next chapter, in 12:3, it's Moses was the most humble man ever. I think there's a reason they're telling you that. I think Joshua wasn't. Listen, you don't want Marines to be humble. You want them to be rough. Josh is a Marine, but he's going to have to take the place of Moses. Now, granted, an 80-year-old Marine is an 80-year-old. But by the time he becomes the leader at 80, he's going to have to be able to dial it back and know that God uses other people in other ways. I'm going to tell you that one of the things that I find from my colleagues, and this is a personality thing. Some of you have this problem and some of you do not. But I find from my colleagues that in ministry, many of them, the biggest struggle in their life is competition. They are competing. They look at themselves as competing with the other churches and the other ministries. I'm not a competition guy. It's just not part of my makeup. But that, my wife tells me, is pretty weird. So I'm just going to tell you that for some of you, you have great talents, great voices. You will be used of God. And then somebody who will be more talented will get up, and it will bother you that they are. If you would be a modeler or a discipler, you have to delight that the other person is better than you. In fact, my theory is put around you people who are better than you in everything, and they make you look good. Okay? It's just one of the ways of doing it. Okay, let me go on to part 6 because I got to get this done or I won't get you to a break. Part 6, and this is, I want you to now go into chapter 13, Numbers 13, drop down to say about verse 16. It says, these are the names of the men whom Moses sent out to spy the land. So Numbers 13 should jump off the page. Numbers 13 is a game changer. It's the spies passage. Now, he sends out who? Somebody read 17 down to 20.
When Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan, he said to them, go up here into the Negev and go up into the hill country. See what the land is like and whether the people who live in it are strong or weak, whether there are few or many. How is the land in which they live? Is it good or bad? And how are the cities in which they live? Are they like open camps or with fortifications? How is the land? Is it fat or lean? Are there trees in it or not? Make an effort then to get some of the fruit of the land. Now the time was the time of the first ripe grapes.
Now, when this happened, Joshua and Caleb did not represent the majority opinion. In fact, their report was the minority report. And you don't really see Joshua as being the one who steps up and says it loudly. Rather, you see Caleb, who is the one who speaks on behalf of them. But here's the thing. It's very clear in verses 18 through 20, when you read it out loud, that Joshua is very much on board with doing something different than the other people want to do. What is it that Joshua wants to do? What is the recommendation later on in the passage? Go into the land. So God has to build into the leader a specific vision of the work to follow exactly what he's saying. And Joshua learned about this invaluable tool in Numbers 13, where all of a sudden he's got to be able to do something that's hard to do. What does Joshua have to learn in the spies situation? 10 spies say no, 2 spies say go. Why is that hard? Yeah, and he's about to take on the leadership of the nation, and by the time he steps into the role, it can't be always understood by the majority. The majority of people in the majority of human history were wrong. You need to remember that. The majority of people in the majority of human history were wrong. And because most of us aren't leaders, most are followers. They see the problems. Leaders look for the answers. And so there has to be a value of vision, learning to see what God said. Why was Joshua and Caleb, why were they insistent to go? God told us to go. Why are we not going? God told us to go. That's faith. And what Joshua did was he was able to speak in faith because he understood the value of doing exactly what God said. I got one more and then I'm going to get you to a break. And the last one is the older generation in Numbers 26 dies off. And they solve the problem of the daughter inheritance in 27, 1 to 11. You remember this? And now I want you to go to 27, 12 very quickly. Numbers chapter 27, beginning in verse 12. And when you do that, here's what you'll read. Then the Lord said to Moses, go up to the mountain of Abarim and see the land which I have given to the sons of Israel. And when you've seen it, you too will be gathered to your people, as Aaron your brother was, for in the wilderness of Zin, during the strife of the congregation, you rebelled against my command to treat me as holy before their eyes with eyes at the water. These are the waters of Meribah of Kadesh in the wilderness of Zin. Then Moses spoke to the Lord, saying, May the Lord, the God of the spirits of all flesh, appoint a man over the congregation who will go out and come in before them, and who will lead them out and bring them in, so that the congregation of the Lord will not be like sheep that have no shepherd. So the Lord said to Moses, take Joshua son of Nun, a man in whom is the Spirit, and lay your hand on him, and have him stand before Eleazar the priest and before all the congregation, and commission him in their sight. Here's what I see. A true leader of God needs to learn for the flock that he is to guard them more than his own life. That the true leader needs to say that the flock's more important than I am. And having heard that he was about to die, Moses wasn't thinking, I'm going to die, like Hezekiah. Moses was thinking, okay, now what about the people? Who's going to lead the people? What are you going to do for the people? And so when Joshua is brought in, it's because Moses is beseeching God because of the people. In verses 18 to 20, the new leader needed the endorsement of the old leader so that the transition would be smooth. And so what I see is that Moses handed the baton off to Joshua, and I found out that as you look in 21 to 23, the new leader needed to be established in the existing leadership structure before they made their march forward. So what happens here is graduation. He learns to receive a commission. He learns to get his graduation and be publicly okay with being in the place. Look, this doesn't sound like anything, but I got to tell you, there's an awful lot of people who are given positions of leadership and they're 2 years into it still walking around like, all shucks, like they don't know they're supposed to be leading. If we put you in a position of leadership, it's because we believe you belong there. And that means you need to do the job. As a principal back in my principal days, I used to have 500 kamikaze children trying to kill themselves every day and a group of teachers trying to stop them. And I was what you would call the headmaster. And I sat there and I would say to young teachers that came in, stop, stop, stop. Don't spend half a year trying to prove to me that you can do this job. I know you can do it. That's why you have the job. I need you to walk in like you are a teacher, not like you hope to be one. I need you to stand there with poise and look at high school students and say, sit down, class is about to begin. Don't hesitate, don't blink. The first 6 months, I need them to think you've been doing this 25 years. I know you're only 24, but I need them to think you've been doing this 25 years. Because if you walk in there and you hem and haw, they will run you over, and you will never get anything taught. The fact of the matter is, Joshua needed to walk in the door, and he needed to show that he already understood what his job was. Here's what I love about this story. The preparation of Joshua had been going on for 40 years. God was working in him for at least 30 of the 40 years as a leader in front of Moses. Now, the last thing I'll say before the break is this. Joshua, if he exhibited anything, was a great deal of patience in his training. And I am asking you to exhibit a great deal of patience in yours. It is not easy to sit in the seat for hours. I get that. There is nothing I can do to get the Bible across to you if you won't read it and you won't dive in and you won't do the work. Now, I'm not telling you that because you don't know that. I'm telling you that because you're going to go home, try to disciple a couple of girls in a group, and they're going to want you to do it around their schedules and when they feel like it. And it doesn't work. You have to put something into something to get something back out. People get married, and their first Christmas away from home, they'll call and they'll say, it just doesn't feel like Christmas. So you say to them, well, did you decorate? No, my mom and dad used to do that, but we really didn't do that. Okay. Did you make cookies? No, we really didn't do that. Did you go to any parties? Well, there was a party for work, but it just doesn't feel like Christmas. You know why it doesn't feel like Christmas? You're not putting anything into it. If you don't put anything into it, you won't feel it. In the world, you feel something, then you do it. In God's economy, you do something, then you feel it. Did you catch that? So, you love one another and then learn to like one another. In the world, you like one another and then learn to love one another. They're in the wrong direction. The fact of the matter is, commit yourself to do something and then grow to like it. Because some of you are going to end up on a mission field and it's not going to be what you thought it was. Can I hear an amen? And people are going to act in a way that you didn't think they were going to act. And it's not all going to be rainbows and unicorns. There's going to be some, unicorn droppings to clean up. And it's not going to be all that fun. And that's okay. You commit yourself to do what God said, then He'll deal with you. Delight yourself first in the Lord, and He'll give you the desires of your heart.